Okay, so started the recording. So just let me go over the agenda items that have been proposed for this meeting, and then people can add if they want anything, and then we can go through them in some order. We have the 1.10 plan, which we haven't actually started, I guess, the really any, like, usually we've started the discussion for release plan on the mailing list first and then discuss it in the meeting. We haven't really started the mailing list discussion first, but people can bring up stuff they want to talk about here, of course. There was some interest in talking about resource classes. Tim St. Clair brought that up, and then also resource quota. Mike Rubin, who's not here yet, wanted to talk about how we can get more contributors helping out with things like code reviews and stuff like that. And then I want to talk about the SIG scheduling SIG leads. I mean, not to make it a huge surprise, but I wanted to get feedback on the idea, because there isn't currently any official process in Kubernetes for determining who the SIG leads are. I am working less on scheduling lately, and Bobby, who is one of my colleagues at Google and has been coming to these meetings, and you've seen on GitHub and so on, has been doing a lot more work on scheduling. And so my proposal is to just simply replace him with me. If there are any objections with that, we should talk about them, and then we can escalate to the whatever I forgot the name of the steering committee, right? We could escalate to the steering committee to get more guidance on sort of a more official process for choosing a replacement for me. But this was sort of the first one I wanted to throw out there. So we can throw that into the agenda for today. Any other agenda items that people want to talk about before we actually start talking about things?
One thing which I also mentioned in the email is what to do with the daemon search controller scheduling logic. That is a bigger controversy. I think we cannot really address it in today's meeting. And I'm writing a design doc, so probably it's better if we discuss it in our next meeting once that design doc is ready.
Okay, yeah, that was the reason I didn't bring it up, was that you had said you might need to might want to discuss it the next meeting, and not this one. So yeah, so you are not suggesting to add it to the agenda for this meeting, is that right?
No, yes, that's right. I think we can just start talking a little bit about it, or general ideas around it, if we really get the time. But otherwise, no, probably we won't be able to reach to a conclusion today.
Okay. Any other agenda items folks want to suggest?
I think as part of the 110 cycle stuff, I wanted to, there's a bunch of old work and bugs that are filed. We have a backlog of 235 items. Some of those are actual bugs and some of which are like, we have not promoted things. So we have this weird history or legacy where we have half annotation, half fields, because, we had that weird split over time. And some of those annotations will have to go through promotions at some moment in time, like the node selector, or there's a couple other ones. I have to take a look at which ones they were. But we have this weird dichotomy of how some features are and what their support level is.
Yeah, we should definitely go through and see if there are any features that we are still supporting in the annotation form, and deprecate and remove those. And if it's the case that we haven't even created fields for those yet, like when we move those features to beta or something like that, we should create fields for them. In other words, like, we should move those along the path of replacing the annotations with fields for any of the scheduling features. And that was certainly our intention all along, and it's possible that we didn't finish that process. Like, we certainly may have left some of the alpha annotations in there, in addition to enabling the new field version of the feature. So that's a very good solution for a very good suggestion for a cleanup, because I think having those there is going to confuse people. People will wonder which should they be using, the field version or the annotation version of the feature. So that sounds like a good idea. How do you propose we tackle that? I mean, this actually ties into kind of the thing Mike Rubin wanted to talk about, which was like how we can get more community participation in some of the work in terms of reviewing and cleanup and stuff like that.
Part of what I've been doing on other SIGs has been to actually, I did it a couple of releases ago, was to curate the backlog and then do like PSAs to dev and other things. But I don't have bandwidth to do it for SIG scheduling this cycle, because I'm, with Lucas taking a step aside, I have to fill in sort of the mediator role on SIG cluster lifecycle. So I don't have the bandwidth to do that, but I can help facilitate and, answer any questions if somebody wants to pick up that role. But that helps a lot when people want to say, like, where do I go to help SIG scheduling? You actually have a curated list which has a backlog.
Yeah, Tim, a lot of people have come to me and have asked this question, and my answer to them has been like giving them some ideas about what are the options and giving them like the search queries to find all these remaining items and for SIG scheduling. What I've seen a lot is that a lot of people go and pick up some of these feature requests, but people are usually very, very hesitant to take on bugs. So maybe feature requests are more interesting, or their impact becomes more visible compared to like fixing a bug that does not change any functionality.
Well, of course, it's open source. It's glamorous. Yeah. I mean, yes. Like, and it's more satisfying initially also, right? I mean, I found that in open source, adding a feature is, it's easy to understand, and the satisfaction loop is very direct. And understanding the value of, testing or benchmarking or some of the other pieces it's a little more indirect, even though the value may be a lot higher. Right. If that's controversial, let me know. That's just sort of what I've seen in open source, even outside of Kubernetes.
No, that's common in open source in general. People gravitate towards the shiny, and the stalwarts have a tendency to clean up the mess that is a result of it, right? But the problem is we need to develop a methodology, not just within this SIG, but broader across the project itself.
I think many other SIGs have methodologies that work pretty well. And that's what I sort of wanted to come today to. So if I can give you a little bit of context, I work with Bobby, and Bobby was talking to me about some of the, the feeling that, and Bobby, if I'm misrepresenting you, please let me know.
Sure.
That, Bobby takes on a lot and is quite willing sometimes, I think, to burn himself out a little bit in order to deliver and what's needed for this SIG. And the more he does this, the more I get concerned that it's not sustainable or even healthy for the SIG. Google's actually hired Jonathan, who's here right now, Mr. Rickett, or Mr. Okay, Mr. Rickett. And he's going to be on leave a little bit, but he'll be back. But I don't really think that's the systematic answer to how do you balance the desire to add functionality and features and then build a healthy SIG that can be educated and make priority calls and deal with the fact that what if, Bobby wins the lottery and then is gone forever. I think the SIG right now would not be in a great place. What we do in other SIGs is we have the idea of shepherds. So when you start doing your planning for a release, every feature needs to not just have a developer, you also have to pair it with a shepherd who is going to be both being able to add guidance and context for the feature for the developer if it's a new developer, and then also do the code reviews. And this has worked out really well in a lot of the other SIGs. The downside is when we first start the process, what we find is that throughput of functionality in the SIG, it drops pretty heavily because you generally don't have enough shepherds you bring to light the real situation early on, which is that you may not have enough shepherds to shepherd in all the functionality through the SIG for that release. But then what you can do is you start empowering folks and say, great, if you want to add functionality, you want to chop wood, you got to chop wood and carry water also. Let's figure out how to teach you to be a shepherd also. Maybe starting with some smaller items of functionality or less glamorous ones, and then graduating, the shepherds to a more advanced role where they can contribute more. And that's all I got.
No, I mean, we did this in SIG cluster lifecycle too. The problem we have is, I think this is kind of a smaller SIG.
Yeah, this is what I was going to say.
Yeah.
I think we got pretty severely fragmented when the resource management working group formed. That kind of pulled off a lot of the people who used to come to the SIG scheduling meetings, and I'm actually worried that the multi-tenancy working group is going to make things even worse. And so I think that we have to at least consider the problem that Tim brought up, because this is actually what I was thinking, which is like, for example, we have 6 people on the call right now. Well, now we have 9, I guess, so it's a little bit better. This is not a big SIG, and so we don't have as big a pool to draw from as some of the other SIGs.
But I think that's okay. And I think that this is great because we're actually talking about the real problems. What I have found really interesting about the SIG scheduling team and scheduling in Kubernetes in general is it's often seen as a very glamorous piece of technology of Kubernetes. And that many, many times people have come to me and said, I would love to work on scheduling. And in the past, there hasn't been as much of a driving need in open source, or there were other things that were more urgent. I really am very optimistic. I think we'll have one bad release possibly where we don't put out as much functionality as we want. But I think if we did a full court press and told the community and really engage people and said, hey, guess what? There's a ton of opportunities in scheduling, and we enable people when they get involved to possibly have a boot camp or a ramp up session, or something to, say, here's work that you can engage in. I can't imagine that in 1 or 2 quarters, we would not be adding a few engineers. I mean, a lot of people look at scheduling as some of the coolest parts of Kubernetes. Now, maybe they won't be doing the crown jewel pieces immediately, but we should be able to start, building our base.
So I think it's an ongoing process. It's kind of like a continual marketing campaign, because we've actually had people come in and get all the way to maintainer level, like Klaus, but now he's working on other things, right? So it's you need to. I like the idea, but it's part of a ongoing maintenance of the SIG to have like this ongoing recruiting campaign, because without fresh blood, what has a tendency to happen is either they get redirected by their employer for other reasons, right? Or the feature set is good enough for them at that time, right? So that they can work on other things that, of higher priority or external to the core project itself.
So Mike, to be fair, I mean, at Red Hat right now, we're going through our pretty soon, like 6-month planning activity. And, one of the things I was asking Avesh, and I think Bikas, who doesn't get to attend every one of these meetings, and Ravi at Red Hat, who participated, is like, what do we see SIG scheduling wanting to produce in the next 6 months? And like, to Tim's point, like from a basic roadmap perspective, I think, priority and preemption is a critical piece for us to graduate, and then getting more traction around the descheduler is useful. I'm not aware of any other items right now in the SIG that are on the roadmap that I should be tracking per se, honestly, in that time frame.
And I agree with that. And I think that brings me to the next piece. So I think that there's like 3 or 4 things that are coming to light in the conversation, or maybe already obvious to everyone, but we're just collecting once here. One is that the SIG isn't that big. The other one is that it feels to me though that even given, it's not healthy to have us depend on just 1 engineer or 2 engineers. And I think that actively right now, and correct me if I'm wrong, with David focused on other things driven to him by mostly the company, so it's not his fault. I'm hoping that by the summer we'll have 2 engineers actively on Google side with their full-time job in SIG scheduling as developers. Do we have people from other parts of the SIG who are 100% working on this, or?
Like from Red Hat?
Yeah, I mean, from Red Hat, I mean, Avesh has largely been focused on being our scheduling SME, and he's been training up Ravi, who folks might have seen working on the descheduler. I think like your story of people who are interested in scheduling, I think that describes Ravi to a T. Ravi is new to the community. I'd love to see him mature and be able to go through the ladder that Tim was discussing. I mean, obviously, I also look at the incoming bug rate, that we get in our product. It's reported. I actually don't find that we get a ton of bugs on the scheduling side at this point. I'm not sure how the broader community feels, but like relative to say, people's pods not running appropriately or something, it seems scheduling is not the thing that's being a source of pain.
I think you're anticipating my next statement. So it's a great segue. I agree. I don't think this is as a hotbed of, I don't think we need like the 40 engineers that maybe we have in some of the other SIGs. I do think that we need a core. The core should probably be more than two companies and more than definitely like one person from each company, which is why we made the decision, at least at Google, to staff it with 2 people. And I'm hoping that, maybe Red Hat or somewhere else will staff it with 1 or 2 people.
Yeah, so I just told you the 2 people, right?
So
yeah.
That said, though, I think it also means that when we take a look at what we want to do in the release, we probably need to be a little ruthless and make sure that we can match the planning with the resources that we've got.
Yeah, I don't think the problem is as much that we have tons of people trying to add features and they have unrealistic expectations because we can't find enough senior reviewers to take them on. I think the problem is more like the backlog that sort of started this discussion that Tim was talking about, where we don't have anyone to deal with the like 200 issues, identifying which ones would be good for new people, which ones are no longer relevant and should be closed, and so on, that kind of thing.
If we have the 4 people after priority and preemption, wouldn't that be enough to attack that backlog then?
I imagine so.
They're not fully committed at this point.
Well, Jonathan will be in 3 months, and then the question now is from the Red Hat side. Didn't Derek say there'd be Avesh and
Ravi?
Those guys are working on some other future products that we would like to also develop, like cluster capacity to maybe like dry run mode, etc.
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of things that now we put under the SIG scheduling umbrella outside of the core scheduler. So yeah, I mean that was the cluster capacity tool. There's the descheduler component.
Right.
Quota is awkwardly under SIG scheduling, it sounds like, which was new to me. I mean, I'm not aware of like anyone at Red Hat trying to push a new, say, scheduler or a new incubator project in this domain. Like to me, the ongoing chop wood going on is just rebasing these incubator components to like keep up with levels of cube and figure out how we can do that in appropriate velocity. But like I said, outside of like the core priority preemption feature in the core scheduler, I'm not aware of anything that we're looking to push. We just need to keep it functional.
So we work here in that, we're working with the storage team to integrate local storage and making adjustments to the scheduler for that.
Yeah.
My point is this.
I guess I could be forgetting some of these cross-cutting things. That's true, Mike.
Yeah, and my point is, it feels to me that there's the reason I'm here right now is because I want to make sure that Bobby doesn't burn out and that we don't have a single point of failure here. Like if he wins the lottery. So if we have 4 people and also are very careful with what our planning is, and I think pair them up with shepherds, I feel like we'll be okay. But I also think that the next release may be very priority and preemption focused, which is probably the right thing to do, and maybe not have not a lot of other pieces until we ramp up, the additional engineers in both Red Hat and Google. And that sounds great to me, but I want to make sure that we keep it clear. And lastly, and I'm going to say this in front of Bobby, and maybe he'll get angry at me. Sometimes I think Bobby's willing to take on a lot and then realizes at the end of the quarter, just really, really pushing himself to get things into that release. And it's happened once or twice already. And I want to make sure that we have set expectations appropriately. So that's an elected thing and not a required thing.
That common theme occurs across the entire project.
I know.
We are held together by the amazing, valiant effort of a couple of, some people who have been in project for a long time and have worked very hard to help sustain it. But it's, in the long term, it is not a good, sustainable.
So I question that it's across the whole project. I've seen some SIGs handle this better than others.
Well, yes and no. I mean, if certain key people like disappear, the impact would be felt broadly. Right?
Oh, sure. That's why I think that we can take steps here, right? Like I think saying, oh, that's everyone else's problem too is I think we can address this here without a lot of work. So it sounds like, if we can say for sure that we've got, and this is news to me, which is great, I'm really glad we're talking about it, that we've got, 4 mostly dedicated people. To me, dedicated means like 80% of their time in SIG scheduling by the summer.
Well, let's verify if that's the case. I mean, Derek kind of implied that.
All I've said is that I need to know what he said. I need to know what I'm looking at a 6-month roadmap. Red Hat, we want to see priority and preemption go to beta. I mean, the design proposal, if we go talk to it, I'm trying to reduce the requirement set needed to satisfy that. We obviously have customers and we need to support the scheduler. We have at least 2 people, with deep expertise now in the scheduler growing. And I don't plan for them to go anywhere. But I feel like I'm echoing you, Mike, in that I'm not lobbying for major new feature enhancements in the scheduler beyond priority preemption in 110. I would like to see that the scheduler continue to evolve, but that's outside of the core Cube release. So, and ideally we can, attract community around that aside from the traditional scheduling expertise. So that's where we are right now.
Derek, part of the problem today is that some of these people that you mentioned, particularly the 2 guys who are working from Red Hat side, are working on an incubator project, right? Both for, I guess, the scheduler and the cluster capacity tool. So they are not that much involved with like a review process or fixing bugs or any of that form.
I mean, that might be a sign of them just not knowing that they are needed. So if you feel that you need to reach out, I mean, I am pretty much expecting I would like, if there's any help you need, Bobby, to get priority and preemption out the door in Cube 110, I mean, those 2 people I just named to you are on the hook for that same basic need, right? So like, sometimes it's up to making clear how those people can help. And so don't feel bad about reaching out.
Yeah, and one more thing, definitely priority and preemption is really important. But regarding other issues and backlog we have, I think one thing we have noticed, at least what I have noticed, we have not really categorized their priorities, like how high priority they are. So maybe once we have really clear idea how high priority they are, maybe then we might go and spend more time on them. So
that was part of my conversation that I was making earlier, is that a couple of releases ago, I spent an inordinate amount of time clearing through the backlog and literally a week plus of just sorting. I don't remember what release it was, but it was a while ago, where all we did was we wanted to have quote unquote stabilization release. And I think it was the time we graduated Affinity and the taints and toleration shift, which was it's actually a year ago now. But during that time, I spent an enormous amount of time trying to shuffle sort and prioritize the entire backlog of the scheduler. And it's an ongoing effort. Right? It is, and what happens is it gets crufty, out of date, or priorities slightly shift. It's something that is required for every cycle in order for it to make it meaningful.
Isn't this what the role of the SIG leads is, though?
It is, yes.
In the other SIGs, that seems to be part of the responsibilities.
It can be part of the responsibilities. I think it's also important that the people that are filing the issues and that are opening things too are looping people in, so that way we get priority resolution over time. Because otherwise, if it's blank, right, over time, I don't have enough time sometimes to always sort through the backlog. Right. So right now, for as far as other SIGs are concerned, we have probably a much smaller backlog, than other SIGs do.
To be fair, I think that we do a reasonable job of noticing when something is filed that's a hot issue, that's like, here's a major bug. Like, I think we've jumped on all of the like, I don't think there's any P0 bugs in the backlog, because I know I've been looking, since the beginning of the SIG. I always watch the issues that are filed and make sure that we address the things that look like potential serious bugs or what have you. So I don't think there's any P0 stuff in the backlog, but I don't think we know the distribution between like P1, P2, P3 in the backlog, and that's kind of the thing that we need to figure out.
Yeah.
So if we want to distill these things into action items, is it that we need to, like, how many things are in our backlog? 200, you said? I heard someone use that number.
It said 232, but part of this process is, last time I did this, part of this process was hunting down issues that are not appropriately labeled, which is a large number of them. So,
but still, I mean, maybe the first action item could just be taking a look at the ones that are appropriately labeled and, clearing house on those, and, closing the ones that we really don't think we're ever going to get around to, and prioritizing the ones that we should.
I've already started that. I've even closed like legacy issues that Hawkins opened in 2014 just this morning. It would be helpful to like split the work, like not just me, because I can only do so much, but someone else doing a chunk of it.
Sure.
Right?
So if there's 200 of them, then, maybe you can just divide them up into 4 groups and assign them to like 4 people, and then everyone's got like 50, and they can get that done hopefully in, an afternoon. I hope that, triaging 50 of them shouldn't take too long. It sounds like there's a few things going on. One of them is understanding what is the future work that we have. And then, also when we do our planning today, I'm sorry, I'm a little ignorant. Do we have a spreadsheet where we take a look at all of the features, or
we have done that in the past releases? We didn't do that for 110 yet, but we have had a spreadsheet with the stuff that we're doing for each release in the past releases.
Node and Storage does that a lot. I don't know if they still do. Derek, you can confirm. But I think one of the benefits of that is that it lets you really understand. It can let you add annotations like, is there a shepherd? You can tell I'm very focused on that, because if you don't figure out who's going to be reviewing the code when you start it, and you realize, you can quickly realize how to prioritize.
Yeah, we did, but just Mike, on your suggestion, we actually did the shepherd thing for the last 2 releases.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
So then, it sounds like we're hopefully going to be okay then. If, this sounds like there's new information that's come to light. Like, Derek, if you take a look at the other cross-cutting efforts, are you at least convinced that Red Hat should continue to invest the efforts of those 2 people in SIG scheduling, let's just say till the next 2 or 3 releases? And if you're not, that's okay. I'm just asking.
I mean, I think that the internal structure we have right now, we will forever need people working on scheduling, and I think it's a matter of like, some of the stuff that our folks were working on were under the scheduling umbrella, and they were outside the core scheduler. I'm not encouraging our folks to go build more of those things right now. I want to get the people who are here now. I mean, we direct people on SIGs to be there for the long term. So, I mean, to David's point on how you select SIG leads and stuff, I mean, I think it should be associated also with your, long-term involvement with the SIG. So like, I mean, to me, I would love if Avesh became a SIG lead on SIG scheduling as well, right? I mean, I have that expectation for him to act in that regard and do the types of stuff you guys are talking about. So,
we've had other SIGs that have had 3 SIG leads. If that's the role that you think makes sense, I don't see why that isn't something we should be not considering. There's triple negatives there. We should consider it if that's the role that he wants.
That's the type of thing we encourage all of our engineers to go do, right? Yeah.
So I had one comment, which was we've covered a bunch of issues here, but with regard to the planning issue, we definitely need to set up the 110 spreadsheet and start talking about what we want for 110. But I think also it sounds like we should have maybe a 6 to 9 month or even year plan for what we are planning to work on in this SIG. Because like while you were talking, a couple of things came to mind. One was the Cube arbitrator, which has been hanging out in Incubator, and I know that Klaus had some interest in getting that, possibly parts of it integrated with the scheduler, and then also moving the scheduler features to GA, like the node and pod affinity and anti-affinity and taints and tolerations and all of those things, which are, as Tim mentioned, which we moved to beta about a year ago. They've been hanging out in beta for a long time. There are some open issues that we need to address, primarily around scalability concerns for a couple of them. But and so that's something that I think we should put on the plan for this year. I don't think that anybody has time for 110 to do that. But so I think that my point is just that, like, I think we need a 110, as we've done for every release, we need a 110 spreadsheet. We just haven't set it up yet. But I think we should also, just to give the community an idea of what we're thinking of for the whole year-long process, what we're thinking of for this year.
So I think there's 3 points here then. One is, I think we need to publicize what we think is important to do, because I believe that there's a meme going on in Kubernetes that, yeah, SIG scheduling is kind of dead. There's not a lot left. And I think that that's one thing we should probably maybe have a community meeting, presentation of the SIG, let them know that there's still a lot of vital work that has to get done. The other one is that it sounds like to me, and I might be misunderstanding, that Bobby has a lot of sort of like tasks and experience and context that we could probably be sharing with Avesh and I'm sorry, I forgot the name of his partner.
Robbie. I guess, yeah, I generally agree with you. One question I have, David, when you talk about roadmap is, like, the challenge we see right now at Red Hat is we've offered a lot of scheduling primitives, but not a lot of tools to make it easy to take advantage of them. And so what I'm trying to rationalize in my head is, like, is that in the scheduling domain, or is that more in the domain of SIG apps, right? Like, what's that?
I'd like to have that in SIG scheduling, depending on how extensive those tools get. But one of the reasons that I've hired Jonathan for this area is to invest in tools and to be able to help Bobby for that.
Because I guess the challenges I see, and I'll just be frank about it a little bit, is, like, a lot of this ties into the multi-tenancy work, I think, David, that you're looking to do. Like, my major issue with priority preemption right now is it's not clear how I take advantage of it in a multi-tenant environment. So, like, a lot of these things are cross-cutting, and I don't think people necessarily know always the right SIG to go to for them. But in my head, longer term, when I look 6 to 12 months out, I'm expecting a way of demonstrating to our PMs and our users that this is how you make natural use of affinity and anti-affinity and all that stuff that we've been adding. I think a little bit at the beginning of that was some of the stuff that Vish had done to let you get steered towards nodes that had GPUs properly, right? I see us getting more interested in that space. And it's just a matter of, is this the SIG that we want to, carry that banner, or is this the SIG that just builds the primitives?
Yeah, I think I agree with Michael. I mean, I think that this is the right place to start for those tools. I think we could see, if it makes more sense later to move it to different SIG, we could consider that. But I do agree that general class of problem, whether you call it tools like Mike did, or the user experience around the scheduler primitives, like you were talking about it. Like, I think that is an important thing for 2018. We do get a lot of questions from people. I mean, we have documentation about how you can piece together these things to do things like dedicated nodes and what have you, but we don't have a lot of good tools around automating that and making it easy. So I'm 100% supportive of making that a priority in 2018. Bobby was already starting to think about that in terms of, like, the cluster, like how you can use the cluster capacity simulator to predict what the effect of submitting a job will be with respect to preemptions, like what will get preempted, will it fit in the cluster, and that kind of thing. So, like,
assuming we have agreement on that roadmap type stuff at a high level, then I don't see our staffing changing at Red Hat.
Okay. That's great, Derek. And I think it's also really important too, because I think that if the people what I've noticed a tendency is when engineers are just doing the infrastructure and not working on the systems that consume them, they can sometimes lose, they can miss opportunities, and then usability suffers. So that's one of the other reasons why I'm very excited to hopefully give Bobby breathing room. And I keep talking about Jonathan like he's not here, but he's sitting right next to us. You can turn your camera on and wave if you want. Might be nice. And so I have a lot of high hopes for the SIG in 2018 and then beyond.
All right, so we should, it sounds like we should crowdsource the 110 spreadsheet as we usually do, and then also do something longer term to give people an idea of the scope of what we're thinking about for 2018 in the SIG. That sounds like good thing. We have about 19 minutes left. Is it safe to move on to a new topic, or?
So what are the action items that we've got? Can we enumerate them so we didn't just
So
have a conversation?
I think one thing he mentioned was crowdsource a spreadsheet. So we need to get a spreadsheet in place. The second thing that I really would like help with, and it not just be me, would be to divide up the backlog such that somebody goes through, and it's not fun and it doesn't take an afternoon. It takes way longer because you need to read through the history of some of this stuff. Mm-hmm. And some of it is cross-cutting and some of it is legacy problems that have existed since Epoch. So it takes a while to suss through it all and to assign relative priorities and determine whether or not we should close them. If someone can help me with that adventure, I can help do pieces of that, but it's going to take a while.
I can help with that, Tim. I mean, because I think that you and I are probably the only two who have the context from across the multiple years over which these were filed and never handled. So it would be great if more people can help, but I think that the two of us need to be involved in that since, like you said, there's a lot of history for some of these things.
Yeah, in general, like, I mean, I'm willing to help in any areas, like even triaging and reviewing. So, I mean, in any areas, like, I mean, you can reach out to me, and I'm willing to help in any area.
Yeah, I will also help, so as much as I can.
So it sounds like one action is crowdsourcing the spreadsheet. The other one is chewing through the backlog, and hopefully, if we can get people besides David and Tim involved, maybe for some of the newer issues. So maybe take that to a thread and figure out the best way to do that. And then the last one is maybe looking at future planning beyond just 110 release. Is that correct, David?
Yeah. I think we should also do a doc. Maybe Bobby and I can work on it. And then we should do it. We should crowdsource it also, but Bobby and I could maybe pre-populate it with some of the ideas for 2018.
And then maybe finally a community meeting to talk about like what we're doing and that there are things coming out, and including, people who may not feel comfortable delving in the deep pieces of the scheduler, but are interested in coming up with usability tools and systems and ecosystems to help make it easier to work with.
Yeah.
A side note, one of the things that really made me surprised was that some of the support people in Google and our SREs who are very familiar with Kubernetes tend to give scheduling bugs to the networking team. And also have a very dim sort of understanding of what scheduling pods are and how the system works. And so, possibly even, I don't know what sort of educational things we have, but a YouTube movie might not be a bad idea, or some way of educating folks. I don't know. Some people like to read. Some people like to listen to something. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's a good idea. We have the documentation, but I think that the how the components of Kubernetes interact and what the responsibilities of each of them are is something people are always confused about.
Yeah, and I'm willing actually to volunteer Mr. Ickett here on that one because he's new, so he'll have like fresh eyes and know maybe what's not obvious to the rest of us who are more familiar with the system.
Okay, other action items from that discussion?
Do we want to expand the list of SIG leads?
Yeah, so I was going to go to that next. I considered that a separate topic, but nobody said anything else. So yes, we could go on to that. So yeah, I mentioned at the beginning that I'm less involved in scheduling these days, and Bobby, as Michael has alluded to, is kind of taking over, at least as the on the Google side, as kind of the lead in the scheduling area, and so. I was hoping that he could take my place. It sounds like there's some interest from Red Hat in getting Avesh involved. I don't know. We don't have. I did research before this meeting. I talked to like some of the people on the steering committee. There isn't really any official process yet for figuring out who the SIG leads are. I did talk to Tim St. Clair, and he was amenable to me stepping down and having Bobby replace me. But we both felt like we should discuss it at the meeting. And if Avesh is also interested, like Michael said, I don't think there's any reason we can't have three leads. So maybe we should just get feedback from the folks who are on the call right now. We should also probably carry it over to the mailing list to make sure nobody feels like they're left out of this discussion. But like, how do people feel about that? I guess the proposal on the table is the 3 co-leads. Is that kind of the idea?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, also like as Derek said, like, so I mean, I am willing to help in any capacity, like in whatever way I can help this SIG. So.
Yeah, and I know that also one of the reasons why there isn't a procedure yet for replacing SIG leads is I think that Joe Bita and maybe some others were interested in trying to define multiple. Sorry, there's some weird echo over there. Trying to define multiple roles, like someone would be kind of the administrative lead of the SIG, someone would be the more like technical lead of the SIG, and we kind of have all of these roles combined today into a single role, which like I don't have a problem with that one way or the other, but
David, I just on that, I think Tim can touch upon this. We talked about that yesterday a little bit in the steering committee meeting, and the idea of there being a consistent set of roles that you could apply across all the SIGs is somewhat challenging, given the divergent nature of a lot of SIGs. The one thing that was going to come out, I believe soon, was Phil Whitrock and Joe were working on a survey that would send out to SIGs about how they do basic procedures, so we can kind of crowdsource ideas on what or if anything we want to formalize. I mean, practically from my perspective, I think it's up to the SIG to decide a little bit right now on how they want to handle leadership. I think for my I don't know how anyone else feels, but I feel like just a note to the mailing list describing, the change of situation for you, David, and then like a lazy consensus approach seems fair, right? I don't think this has happened very often. I'm not aware of other SIGs that have transitioned much, but it's something that like you can't really always wait on the steering committee to decide how to do it because
yeah. I wasn't suggesting to wait. I was just I was just mentioning that.
But like, if we experiment with the process here, and it works relatively smoothly, that demonstrates as one valid process, right? And I think that's fine.
Okay, so maybe we can add to the action item list. I think I should send the note to the mailing list just because I'm the one who's leaving. Not leaving, but like stepping down as a SIG lead, and then propose what we talked about here on the call. Is that reasonable? Does anyone who's on the call have any objection to having the 3 SIG leads that we've talked about here? If you don't want to speak up on the call or something, feel free to send me email privately. We can talk about it.
I think adding yourself to the owner's file to make sure that things are appropriately assigned for review and everything else is probably a precursor to that.
Sorry, you mean adding the new SIG leads? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So update the owner's files appropriately, so that way Avesh is with whom much is given, much is expected. So you will now be on the review chain and everything else that comes along with it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. So the other items on the agenda were, there was some interest in talking about resource class and priority for in resource quota. I think originally there was some confusion about which one people want to talk about, but then the consensus was actually people wanted to talk about both. So let's do resource class first, because I think that's mostly been in the resource management working group. we haven't really talked about it here. Tim or Derek, I can't remember which of you had the concern about it, but do you want to talk about it?
I think this can be a quick conversation. So resource class was a concept that came out of our face-to-face last year. Red Hat did go and prototype it. So Vikas Chowdhury did a nice prototype with Avesh. I think just bias time, I think we've all, in the end of year resource management work group meeting, we all agreed to defer further discussion of resource class post Cube 110 in favor of dedicating our energies on graduating the things we've already started. I have no additional resource to sign up at Red Hat to go evolve resource class further. So for the 110 cycle, so I'm not actively pushing that right now.
Yeah, and I don't think Vish, who is the main person who is involved in that on our side, I don't think he is actively pushing. Correct me if I'm wrong, Derek. But
we all have uniform consensus in that group that, not to push it right now. And at best, there has been interest from other members of the community. I think some folks from eBay had discussed wanting to potentially explore the prototype that was done to see what they could do with heterogeneous devices. But pretty clearly in the other group where this came out of, we had agreed to defer it for the time being. So to me, the more pressing concept that we can talk through needs is the priority preemption one.
Yeah. So let's, before we get to that, see if anybody objects to, I had not heard anybody on SIG scheduling pushing for resource class, at least not in the meetings. Maybe there was some GitHub issue I missed, but.
There was just traffic on the community stuff, and in looking through it, there's a bunch of pitfalls that are associated with doing that. But if no one's pushing it, then let's just punt and defer, because priority and preemption are the highest priority things that we should be focusing on, right?
Okay, it sounds like nobody. I just want to make sure we give space for people who might disagree with what we're saying. But I don't hear anyone disagreeing. If somebody does feel strongly about the resource class thing, the issue number is 782 in the community repo, and feel free to ping that and say you have some urgent.
I would just, so you don't feel bad, David, the major motivation for it requires device plugins to graduate to beta. And so given that hasn't yet happened, it's a bit premature. So
yeah, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure we don't kind of gang up on the people who
okay.
want it. Like I said, I haven't heard from Vish that he has any strong interest in pushing that right now, and I haven't heard it from anyone else either. But I just want to make sure if there's somebody here who does, that we give them the chance to say something. So yeah, but it sounds like the consensus, at least among the people who are talking, is we won't do anything with that. So since we only have 7 minutes left, let's move on to the one people keep saying is more important. So the priority and preemption. So my understanding there is that there is not any real controversy around the feature itself, but the thing people are interested in is how we add priority to resource quota and the design that we've been iterating on there for several months. Is that right?
I would phrase it like this, I guess. From my perspective, I want to be able to see priority and preemption graduate to beta. And at least for the use cases at Red Hat that we've explored, and I can't know for the other community members, I guess I'd be curious on their perspective, is the major thing I need to be able to do is have a way of default denying usage of a particular priority in a particular namespace or set of namespaces. And so the first route that we've gone to try to pursue that is using quota mechanisms to do that. It may turn out that that's not necessarily the best way of doing it. But if we had a means to default deny or restrict usage of a priority to a particular set of namespaces or outside of the quota system, I would have no concerns with priority and preemption graduating.
So Derek,
at a later time, we wanted to quota those priority bands separately. I think we could do that after the fact, to be honest, but I don't have a strong use case need for our users right now to say, I give you this much quota at this much priority. My more immediate need is I need the equivalent of critical pod annotations to be satisfiable via priority that can't be abused by our end users. And having some way of having a default deny yes, no in a namespace would be completely sufficient.
So It seems to me like the cleaner way of doing it is to make it part of priority, to make it part of quota. I'm not saying that's the only way to do it, but I'm just curious why you think that it shouldn't be done as part of quota. In other words, like if you don't have quote, if you don't, just to make sure other people on the call understand what this alternative is. Like if you don't have quota at some priority level, then that means that you cannot use resources at that priority level. Like, why does that not sound?
So to be clear, the design that's been iterated on, I think, is pretty close to this last set of comments that were from me that gave a way to do it via quota. And in fact, at Red Hat, Vikas Chowdhury had gone and prototyped it, and I think he was reaching out to Harry, explaining the outcomes of that prototype. The issue is, like, Tim had introduced some concern that, you know, maybe this was a step too far. I think Klaus did the same. But if the goal of the community is to be able to graduate it, I just want to make clear that, like, from my standpoint, the graduation criteria is just the ability to default deny. Admittedly, right now, default deny via quota is a bit cumbersome because, like, the default is you have everything. And so that might make it cumbersome or awkward. But
yeah, you have to create an empty quota essentially in every namespace if you want to default deny.
But, like, practically, I don't know what Google or other community members view as, like, a key impediment to priority preemption. But, like, we would be fine on our end if I could deploy 2 priorities or 3 priorities and just restrict one priority from being used only in, like, your kube system namespace or your OpenShift infra namespace. So, like, if we can get priority preemption to being equivalent to the critical pod annotation, then, like, that to me is enough of a success to support it going to beta. Whether or not you do quota around it or quota at priority, I think that can come later, honestly.
That can come later, but it'll be hard to get rid of the existing mechanism that we add to maybe for like this halfway solution that we want.
Yeah, the other idea that Clayton and I batted around a little bit is, like, we have mutating webhooks, invalidating webhooks that were added in Cube 1.9. Like, if we were to pursue a solution that was, like, being able to deploy a webhook to a cluster that could introspect a config to say whether or not this namespace was allowed to use that priority, that would be fine as well. I can appreciate Klaus's concerns about he thinks it's stepping on some other work, and I don't want us to have to iterate on this item too much if it's getting community trepidation. And to be frank, everything that's there is pretty close, as you know, Bala, to, like, me being slow to figure out where it should get to. So I'm in some way arguing against my own comments, and but, like, Vikas did prototype it. It does work. It would meet our needs, but it's not the only way to meet our needs.
He prototyped what?
He prototyped quota at priority.
But, like, what solution to the specific problem?
The design that's proposed.
Okay, right.
Basically, the design is to add priority, like having a priority field that matches against certain namespaces and certain priority names as well. So,
like, David, if you recall, we added scopes to quota, so you could see this quota match terminating, non-terminating. The current design was to add a new scope syntax to say match priorities that meet this criteria.
Yeah, and then default is going to be deny, I believe, in the latest proposal, right? The latest version of it.
That was configurable in what Vikas had implemented. But either way, my point being, like, is the need to quota at priority super high for you guys, or do you have a similar need, which is you want to protect what's in your kube system namespace?
Well, I think that, go ahead, Bobby, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I think it's mostly the latter, but it's also probably, I don't know, after this graduates to beta, I'm pretty sure some users want to have quota per priority. This is sort of like given.
But maybe we'll have clearer use cases that drive that requirement, I guess is my thought. Like, right now it's a bit speculative on, like I don't have an end user that's asking for my operators only get 5 pods at cluster service priority or something like that. Like, it's more like I want to be able to satisfy what critical pod annotations provide using this new tool. And, like, when our various customers can then start exploiting priority and preemption a little further, maybe we get a clearer input signal on what the right next step is.
Yeah, I think the most important thing is to make sure that the design of priority and preemption itself doesn't foreclose the ability to do the per priority quota.
It does. I mean, that's been prototyped. Really, the only part I feel unsure about with quota is the default deny, using quota to default deny versus potentially using another facility for it.
Right, and I kind of, without having read all of the latest comments on that issue, like what you're saying sounds reasonable. That we shouldn't necessarily gate moving priority and preemption to beta on having that per priority quota implemented, especially if, like you said, the per priority quota has already been prototyped, and it's just a question of how you do the default deny.
Yeah.
So
That's
Derek,
just my opinion. I don't know.
so yeah, Derek, if you elaborate a little bit on how you envision doing the default deny, we might reach the conclusion faster. So what is your thinking there? So as having another field in namespace that says default is deny, or what?
I mean, Avesh has done similar things with whitelisting tolerations or blacklisting, I guess, tolerations and default node selectors all through admission control. I guess one option I had in my head was you could do something a bit like the webhook configuration that says, when I declare a priority, I have a namespace selector that says these are the namespaces that match the selector that are allowed to consume this priority. And if you're not in that list, we write a simple admission controller that denies your usage. And so in that way, when I declare my priority, as an operator, I could say priority critical services only matches namespaces that are the kube system namespace or something, right? And so that's one option. The other option would be, that you do some other pattern we explore, which has a new priority configuration resource, and not necessarily on the priority entity itself. And then a third option would be we do some pattern that matches annotations on a namespace. But that's something we can wrestle with or think through. It's just where I was today when I was trying to think about, what's the minimum we can do to make me comfortable deploying priority in production. I don't know. How do you feel about those options, I guess?
I mean, annotations is somewhat similar to like having an extra field in namespace, but it's, I don't know, in a way it might be a little cleaner, and it may be easier to get rid of if we decided in the future that we don't want to go this path. The webhooks, I don't know how exactly it's going to work. It's like limiting the priority to some of the namespaces. I feel like that's kind of like a not fully fledged solution in my opinion. It feels like if we wanted to do that, we would better go and add a new field like a namespace selector for the priority itself, or a priority class itself. So I don't know about that.
So we've run, I don't know, maybe if you guys want to talk about it, I mean, we should probably end the meeting because we're out of time. One comment I'll make is that, I think maybe another alternative is to just rethink quota completely. It's a little radical, but having quota be per namespace has always, I think, been problematic. And you could, in theory, make it a singleton global object, kind of like the cluster resource quota in OpenShift, and just say, like, there's a single object that the cluster admin owns that defines the quota, the per priority quota, and other policies around priorities and quota in that single object. And then that object can use namespace selectors on namespaces to say what each of those quotas applies to. Like, that's a little more radical, but that might be the direction to move, because I think, I don't know your experience, Derek, you've worked with the quota stuff a lot more than anyone else on this call, but like, I think the feeling I've gotten from people is that, like, it probably never should have been per namespace, and that making it global would be a lot simpler.
So we have the exact opposite customer experience, I guess. So per namespace quota is normative in probably the majority of our customer deployments. And I think it's because we have tooling that defaults what appears in a namespace when a user creates one.
That's fair,
and so our users have been trained a little differently.
Yeah.
I think what I'm apprehensive on your suggestion, David, a little bit is like, if I would like to find the minimum solution needed to just satisfy a default deny criteria that doesn't slow priority preemption from being more broadly available, and like radical redesigns of quota are not something that facilitates that, to be honest. And we get a lot of value. I really want to be able to use priority to deploy all of our work appropriately to every node in our cluster. And that's not calling out to me a need to redesign quota where we've been relatively
fair. And also, like, we have also talked about like trying to talk to you guys about upstreaming the project request template stuff so that you could do what you're talking about more simply. And that would be another approach that wouldn't require making the quota be global. Anyway, sorry, maybe I shouldn't have brought up any of this. But.
Yeah, and there are other constraints that you might be brushing over with global quota, that it becomes a shared locking problem, and it only works appropriately if you have about 100 namespaces in a covering quota. We've had some that's like our scaling appreciation on that. So quota is difficult. Okay,
I withdraw my comment, but thanks. That was a good. That was interesting to know.
Okay. So Bobby, how about this? Like, let's proceed as follows. Like, we can talk a little bit more on the issue. I'd like to nominate Avesh to, kind of be my proxy here a little bit. And if you were talking about a shepherding model, handling the default deny on priority preemption, I would be happy to make him be that voice. And across the three of us, we can iterate on that in the next week. But like, the smallest solution that satisfies my need, as I'm okay with, and if you're comfortable with that, then that probably achieves the goal that we have with the resources we have appropriately.
Default deny is not, in my opinion, is not the only requirement. We eventually need to have real coda, because sometimes for critical pods, you're right, probably it's just yes or no, but for many other pods in the system, we may actually need to give coda, a certain amount of coda to users.
If you separate default denial from being a quota problem, and you do resource accounting just with quota, then I think that part of the proposal that says the quota that matches these priorities is pretty clear. That works fine. I'm not concerned about that. The default denial part, if we separate that out of the quota system, maybe we can come to a quicker solution. And then, like, for Mike's discussion of a roadmap, like, I think it's perfectly fair to be like, we're deferring handling this necessarily in 110 in light of just getting community feedback by getting the feature out there first to let us know how you truly want to partition it. Unless you guys have a deep experience in Borg on priority that you might have more insight, but like our user base is probably not going to be as savvy in the near term with respect to priority as maybe you guys are envisioning.
Sure. No, sounds good. Okay, let us get together again. We can all think about it, and hopefully we can find a solution that is clean enough and is flexible enough to make all of us happy.
Okay. All right. Sounds good.
And make sure if you have a meeting that you send email to the SIG scheduling mailing list, just so it doesn't seem like it's some kind of secret meeting between Google and Red Hat. That's my only request on that.
Okay.
Okay. I guess the meeting is finished. We went way over. Thanks everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.